Welcome to the Transforum and the Trans-Canada Project, where we invite some of our guests from the Trans-Canada Project to come and talk about issues that are relevant to the trans community. If you've been watching, you've seen a show on passing and a show on pronouns. And tonight, we're going to talk about names. Names are interesting, of course, because a lot of us decide eventually to change our name, something that suits the person who we really are, to be more authentic. And there's a whole process to that some people think, it just happens like that, but it doesn't. It can be difficult. And even the process of trying to select a name sometimes can be very difficult as well. So tonight we have two guests with us. We have Cloe, who is originally hailing from Montreal, but who's now out in the Western provinces, out in BC, and enjoying the rain right now. And she is a game designer, which is very cool. And we're very interested to hear what she has to say about names. And the other person we have here is Carlie. And Carlie grew up in this, maybe I shouldn't say she grew up in the 70s and 80s because that kind of dates her a little bit, but the whole point being that she grew up in a very different time. Things are very different for trans people now than they were then. And I think her insights into names are going to be very interesting tonight as well, coming from the perspective of what it's been like for her through all of those times, different changes and things. And of course, we've got us. I'm Carrie, and we've got Kelly here, and we are the Trans-Canada Project, right?
That's right.
So let's just dive right into it, guys. Why don't you tell us just a quick little introduction to you and your name? And if you're willing to share what your original name was and how it transformed, that's fine. If you're not, that's fine too. Just tell us a little bit about your name. How about we start with you, Carlie?
Okay. I never know who's going to go first. So my name right now is Carlie Patrice Summers. I picked Carlie because everyone knew me through my older days as Carl. And to simplify everybody and myself, Carlie just happened to be easier, I think, for people knowing that I've changed my name, especially at my workplace. It was easy for everybody just to say, "Hey, Carlie," instead of my old name. And everybody was quite good with that. So I was happy and everybody else. I was born Joseph Patrick, and everybody called me Patrick. So I kept that as my middle name, but changed it to Patrice, because a friend of mine, she told me that in the French language, Patrice can be male, masculine or feminine, and that just seemed appropriate for somebody who's transgendering, that I could change my name to that. And Summers, well, I came out June 16th, 2018, which was the weekend before summer starts. So Summers it was. So Carlie Patrice Summers was born.
Cool. How about you, Chloe?
Yeah, in my case, my complete name is Cloe Anne Sophie Veilleux. So I have actually two middle names. I actually had two middle names before, but I didn't even know them. I knew my first middle name, and I didn't even know I had a second one on my birth certificate until I started filling the paperwork to change them. And I was like, oh, I have two. I guess I can have two still. I'll just switch them both. So my dead name is plastered all over the internet. So I usually don't mind sharing it because anybody who does like 5 minutes of research can find the 15 years of game dev that I've done under my old name, which is Philip. So interestingly, it wasn't planned, but when I realized after the fact my new name and my original name are both Greek, actually, in origin. So I switched to Cloe for a very easy reason for me, is because I had been called that name by friends online. I'm a big online gamer. I've been called that name by friends for at least 8 years. As I've been playing a game where my character was named Cloe, everybody would just call me that name on voice chat rather than my actual name. And when I came out in 2020, so 2 years ago, I essentially just decided to take that name for myself because I knew I would respond to it, because I had been responding to it for 8 years. So there would be no difficulty for me, as I was already trained, and there would be no difficulty for my friends who are very important to me. So they would always already call me that name. So the only people I had to tell and teach about my new name were essentially my family, which I have very limited contact with, or with my employers and colleagues. And I didn't think that this would be so hard for them to learn how to use this new one. So that actually went rather smoothly. A lot of people have said just how much the name Cloe fits me. And I'm happy it does. I like the name after all. I picked it, but I did just lift it from my character. So it's a bit of a lucky streak, I suppose, that it works so well for me. But I did make sure to spell it the very French way with the acute accent, no H, so that people would actually, at first glance, be able to say that it's a distinguished, really French name. Suppose my family name, which I have not changed, is also a pretty big indicator that I'm French Canadian or French. And for my middle names, my mom actually helped me pick the middle one. So Anne instead of Jan, which was my middle name that I was aware of. And the other middle name was Sebastian, which I changed to Sophie because they sound similar. They start with the same letter. They're short, like 2-syllable. So they work well with Cloe, which is kind of like monosyllabic. And when I look at all my names, the very fun thing is that I stayed with Greek for the first name, then the middle name is both are Hebrew in origin, and then the other middle name, both are, once again, Greek in origin, and they almost mean the same thing. One is like grace, the other is grace of God, one is wisdom, the other one is venerable, something like that. So they all like kind of stayed very close, but it's all accidental. It's just funny to look at after the fact and say, wow, random really sometimes makes the coolest things.
I've been very interested lately thinking about this Transform coming up and talking to some of our guests, and that I'm finding that a lot of names come very close, for either like you say, from sort of background and meaning, or from what the sound is like. Kelly, you got a great story about your name, right? So do you want to tell us that one?
Sure. It's a little different. I'm from Western Canada, and my birth name is Kelly. And that was considered a masculine name out there. When we moved out east to Ontario, I got a lot of crap for having a girl's name, and part of me was upset about it, and part of me was kind of secretly yay. So mixed feelings about that. When I came out to my mom, like when I was younger, I shortened it to Kel to get away from the girl's name and some of the hassles I was getting from it. And I'm taking the name back, so it's Kelly again. But when I came out to my mom, I asked her what name she would have named me if I had been born a girl, and she said, "Well, probably Anastasia, because that's your grandmother's name." So I thought that was a pretty cool name, actually. So I've taken that as my middle name. But my mom got to help me pick it, which was kind of cool, actually.
Being the lone non-binary person here, I mean, I'm okay. First of all, I should say all three of you have actually legally changed your name, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm also the only person who has not legally changed their name yet. And I'm still struggling with it, actually, because being non-binary, I would really like to have something that is a little bit more non-binary. Carrie works great as far as that goes, as far as I'm concerned, and Carrie will probably stick. But as Kelly knows very well, because I talk to her about it all the time, I'm still struggling trying to decide whether I want to go with a name that is a longer version of Carrie, or whether I just go with Carrie, or what to do with it exactly. Because again, being non-binary and trans femme, I feel like the name needs to represent that, not to be totally femme, but it's complicated, right? I'll get into more of that maybe as we go on. But so I picked Carrie because it's very close to my legal name, my dead name. Me personally, I don't like the name dead name because I feel like that kills the person that I was. And I like the person that I was. And different people have different feelings about that, right? But for me personally, I like the person who I was. I like the, but it just wasn't complete. And I feel like I can be more authentically who I am now because being out there. So I didn't want to change it a lot, but Carrie, my original name was Gary, which is very, very close. So like Carlie said, you can answer real quick because it sounds almost the same. So bang, I got it. I'm right there. And it's not a hard thing for people to change to. But I am still struggling with trying to figure out what the name should be. And there's a few contenders in there right now. And trying to find something that will shorten to Carrie is also not easy because there's not a lot of options for that. And actually, I can't find any really that are non-gendered. They're all pretty much gendered one way or the other. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I mean, it's a thing about names. When I was trying at the beginning, I was trying to think of sort of Fantasia names, or I was trying to think of names that would be exotic and not like in exotic fruit or anything like that, but something that would bring my femininity to the very top and allow me to finally be who I am. But who I am is me. And as I kept going into it and into it and into it, I found that it didn't have to be a name that I had to think about 10 times before I spelt it, or trying to remember it when I went somewhere and somebody called out my name, or just to come out with some kind of a name that would set me in this aura of being out. So I started bringing it back until I got to Patrick was my name and my roots. So I wanted to keep my roots of some sort. I was called Carl until I was 56 years old. So coming out to be Carlie was simplified for myself. So it all of a sudden made more sense to me to be down to earth about it than to be way over the top and trying to come up with a name that was either from, the strip club or the rodeo club or, any of those things. That's where I came down to. So, and I didn't want to have 3 middle names or 2 middle names. I just wanted to keep with 2, like my first name, middle name, and a last name. So just to make it simple.
What are some of the biggest struggles you had in selecting your name, Chloe?
So like I said, I just stole my character's name, right? And when I made that character about 8 years ago, I was playing Final Fantasy XIV. So it's a Japanese game, and they have a number of different races. And one of them is using French essentially for their last name, and their French name were very French sounding names. But I didn't like the aesthetic of the race itself. They're elves, but they're like tall and very arrogant, but they have like very French sounding names. So I liked the naming convention of those, but I liked the aesthetic of another race, which is called the Mikote, which are cat people. And I decided to make one of those, but essentially say in the background story that she was raised by the other, like she was not from a family of cat people. She was raised, so she got a French family name. She was called Veilleux, actually, was her family name, which means of the island, since she started at one of the starting location that is an island of pirates. So that was all created essentially to make sense in the lore of the universe, because I like lore appropriate names, even though I didn't actually give her a name that her actual species would have used because she was not raised in those conditions. So when I took Cloe as the first name, there was a bunch of reasons why I ended up picking that name. And one of them is that it's a name that you hear as often for girls as for cats. Like, it's a very common cat name. And all in Japanese, it's Kuroe. Kuro means black, and she was black-haired. So a lot of Japanese cats that are black-haired might be called Kuroe, just because it's kind of like calling your black dog Blackie or something. It's that level of not putting too much thought into it. And also, I wanted a name that fits in 4 characters, because the very first Final Fantasy I on the Nintendo 8-bit from like 30 years ago only allowed you to put 4 letters for the name of your party members. So it was important for me to respect the 4-letter rule of old Final Fantasy, because I'm a nerd. A name that works for a cat, and a name that is distinguishedly French, so that people would know when they see my character running around that I'm most likely not English speaking. So these are essentially all the thoughts and ideas that came into naming her. Now, when I did steal the name, like, I'm not a cat, I don't have black hair, like, and I don't live in this world, so most of the rules just went out of the window. But the name works really well, I find. It's also fairly close when we don't say the A at the end, you just say Cloe, which a lot of my friends call me Cloe instead. It sounds very close to the internet nickname, which was also the nickname I've used ever since like 1997 or something, which is dope. Like the Homer Simpson sound, essentially.
Do, 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 do.
Was my nickname for 25 years. So actually asking people to switch from calling me Doe instead of my dead name to Cloe was very small as an upgrade or a change. So people picked it up right away, right? So that also is part of the things that worked well almost by accident.
So you didn't find it hard to get your friends and family to switch?
No, like I said, people seem to think that it fits me. Like, people who have known me pre-transition for years and everything just like immediately caught on. They kind of forgot my dead name, although most people never used my dead name. Like, the tradition for me was to call everyone Miss or Mr. or Master last name. So people would usually do the same thing and just call me Professor or Master, Mr. Veilleux. So people very, very rarely use my dead name. My nickname was more commonly used. So it feels, when I look back in the past, that I've actually hated my nickname, my real name, rather, my entire life. And the one thing I hated the most was the natural shortening of my name. Like, when people would call me Phil, that was like just like the biggest no, I hate that. Don't ever do that again. Call me this instead. So like, nobody used that with me. So I've been staying away from my dead name for as long as I remember. And it's fortuitous, I suppose, because it means nobody really was using it anyway in the first place. So changing to my new name was super easy for everyone.
How about you, Carlie? How did you find people picking it up? How difficult was it to get them to change?
Having them change was easy. I mean, the hardest part for most people was getting used to me, the new me. Picking up the name was quite easy for everybody. And it was really surprising when somebody would call me by my old name and they would be apologetic. They would know exactly as soon as they said it, or there would be almost a pause. It would be like a Carlie, right, type of thing. which was fine. It didn't upset me or anything. I was expecting that people would have a harder time doing it, and they didn't. So at the time when I did come out and I did change my name, I was in a place of work at the gym where we wore name tags anyway. So, I mean, if anybody was going to forget, come on, just look down. You'd see my name. But the name thing wasn't so hard. I think because I changed my male name to a female name using an IE, made it very, very simple. And that's what I was trying to do. I didn't want to have people stuttering all the time. I didn't want them to be trying to say anything but my name because I couldn't remember what I was supposed to be called. So for me, the changing from Carl to Carlie was a simplified version. And I think it worked very well. And I mean, I didn't hate my old name. I just, I mean, it wasn't such a devastating name to say, let me get rid of it totally. Mm-hmm. So, and when I was on stage for drag, my stage name was Carlie. So anybody that knew me from the drag days, they would all call me Carlie anyway if they saw me on the street. So it just wasn't spelled the same.
And Kelly, how have people accepted your new name?
Well, it was very difficult for a lot of people because I've been using it for 59 years and it didn't change. And that really confused a lot of people. No, my mom stumbles over between Cal and Kelly still. My brother calls me Kellyanne, which is actually kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. I have been in working as a photographer. I do a lot of gig work and different things. So I meet a lot of new people constantly, and new people have no problem calling me Carrie. That's just who I am. But I'm actually finding that because my name is so very close, it actually is a little more confusing for some people to pick up the Carrie. It's just easier to slip into the old name very easily. Yeah.
I find that I struggle more with friends who have changed their name just a little, like change the ending of the name so that it's a feminine version instead. I think because most of the time I'm used to using like the short version of the nickname of their name. And well, in that case, it's kind of like the same. So if your name was Christian and now it's Christine, you're Chris in both cases, but there's one of them that feels wrong. Like it's like I find that it makes it harder on me, and I'm assuming on some other people when you keep your like new name and your old name very similar, because I think just out force of habit, like I don't think anybody can really mix up Chloe and Philip. So I've never seen people struggle with that. I mean, I've seen my parents struggle with she, her, or Chloe, but I don't see the slip of the tongue of like lack of attention that I sometimes feel when I have to talk to people who have changed their name just a little. It's just the problem is it's kind of like not a good thing to tell people don't do that. Like some people really just like to keep their initials the same. That's a super common thing actually. Like a lot of people like to keep the name their parents chose for them, but just feminize it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the process of legally changing your name for a few minutes, because I'm finding in some of the situations where I've been, I'm thinking particularly of employment where the employer still has to use my legal name, but everybody else is calling me by my assumed name. And, you know, some of them are like, well, just change your name. But it's not quite that easy, is it? So tell us a little bit about the process, how it went for you, and how easy or how hard it was.
Well, for me, I downloaded all of the paperwork from the government site on what to do to change your name, your gender, and everything else. So to change your name is very simple. It's just a matter of fill in the boxes and follow all the instructions and pay them $175, and they'll send you documents. I wanted at the same time, when I was changing my name, is to change my gender at the same time. So I had to have a doctor and a counselor sign off a sheet, each of them, that I had to submit with it so that I could change that as well. But it was very straightforward. It took about maybe a total of 3 months by the time I got all my documents back. Well, actually, I sent them all my documents. All they sent me back was a piece of paper that said rechanged. Then about 6 weeks later, I got a birth certificate in the mail that showed my new name and my new gender. But other than that, it was very straightforward. So I did all of that first before I went to my employer and said, I've changed my name. And that was it. And everybody just started calling me by my name. That was it was very simple. I didn't have any issues about doing that or getting through it. It was very simple.
Very good. How about you, Chloe?
Yeah, so I did it. I was maybe 3 months on HRT when I started filling the paperwork, because I was recommended by various places or things I've read online to start the process of changing legally the name. Once you don't pass when you show your driver's license anymore, something like that. In my case, that happened around the 3-month mark, I want to say. I didn't get a ticket, so I couldn't really actually do it. But when I went to the pharmacy and she asked me if that name was my kid or my husband, is when I started realizing, okay, cool, I don't look like that name anymore. So I started the process rather early. I find, compared to what I've been reading online, a lot of people wait sometimes way longer than I did, but I guess HRT did its magic really quickly for me. And I come from Quebec, so I'm born in Quebec, and therefore I have to change everything in Quebec. That's the kind of big oomph about name change in Canada, is that it's tied to the province of birth. Or if you come from somewhere else, you are often asked to do it with your country of origin, which can be really difficult for some people. But Quebec, since about 2015, has added the self-identification rules. So there is a form you can fill to change your first name, middle names, and gender all in one shot for $142. Which is ridiculously low when you consider the amount of people and judges and paperwork that they do on their side when you send them that stuff. So it's kind of like a barrier for people who are really poor, but at the same time, I find that it's really not that expensive for the amount of work involved. And I think there's organizations that help out people who can't afford it, so that they get the money to do that. But it took about 6 months, a bit longer than Carlie. I suppose Quebec is slower, but it was also in the middle of the pandemic in my case. So a lot of the places were closed during lockdown at first, and that's around when I started doing it. Now, that gave me a certificate of gender and name change, which by itself does absolutely nothing. So from that point, I had to ask for a new birth certificate, which eventually came. And after that, I had to start chasing down a lot of places to tell them this is my new name. And they sometimes would ask for the certificate. Sometimes they wouldn't. Some of them actually required you to mail the official certificate, and they would mail it back. So for that time, you can't change anyone else that requires it because it's gone. But that wasn't too bad. I think the big trap that a lot of people don't realize is that credit unions, companies don't magically get the information that your insurance number is the same, but you're a new name. and they actually essentially lose sight of you and your credit rating. So I can't take a loan anymore, or at least at first. So I had to send them faxes because they work in the last century, apparently, to let them know that this file over there with that name should now be pointing to this file over here with this new name. And I'm still not out of this. Like when I moved to Vancouver, which happened pretty much as everything was finalized. Like I literally got lucky that I arrived to this province and legally I was Cloe everywhere, like health card, driver's license, birth certificate, and pretty much everything was now under Cloe. So I got here and I opened a new bank account because Caisse Populaire Desjardins doesn't exist in BC, which was kind of tricky to do. And then I asked for a credit card because I'm like, I still have the one from Quebec, but I mean, I have a bank account with you here now. Maybe I should have a credit card with you. And I got declined because they don't know I exist. And that was it. That was just like, wow, I actually did update some of the credit unions, not all of them, because there's a lot. But apparently I'm with my salary and career, like 17 years in the game industry, was not able to get a basic credit card. Was a bit surprising to me. So I'm kind of like reworking on my credit rating. So I bought a car recently. I could have paid it cash, but I decided, you know what? I'm going to finance it just to give Cloe a new credit score.
Yeah.
So yeah, that part is actually tricky. And there's a couple of other like tricks in changing your name. I want to say that the whole Interact system for e-transfer is also not as magically updated as your bank account. So you kind of have to chase that service in particular. So you don't, when you e-transfer money to someone, it's not under your dead name, where luckily I transferred money from my Desjardins account to my new account over here. And I saw that I was dead naming myself whenever I did a transfer. So it took 3 calls and about like 7 to 8 hours before we figured out how to change that specific name, because we had to discover whose system was at fault. So yeah, it can be tricky and it can be hard. And I got lucky. My voter's card arrived at my new address with my new name and everything, but a lot of people still get them in their old name. A lot of people get them both, new name and old name, at their address, so they vote twice. Like the voting system is pretty difficult to deal with for trans folks. So a lot of people have complaints, and I saw articles about that, like in the most recent elections, just how hurtful it can be to get dead named like that by the government.
Mm-hmm. I've had to, with COVID, everybody's doing COVID checks, and you have to show your COVID vaccinations and your ID, and all of that for me is still old name. And worse than that is pictures with a nice goatee. So it's been fun, walking in a skirt and looking as much femme as I possibly can and showing them this ID. But you know what? I have never actually had anybody even blink an eye. They've all been fine. And that's been good. I'm also not looking forward to the challenge because I was born in the north of Ireland. So it could be potentially interesting what's going to happen there. I have checked, and apparently I have to change it here. And then when I've changed it here, then I can go back there and change the birth certificate, much like you do with the name certificate here and the birth certificate. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to that challenge for sure. Kelly, you're pretty fresh in things. How's the process going of changing things over?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle. I was born in Saskatchewan, did my name change in Ontario. So I got the name change certificate, and it really wasn't complicated other than the fact that I didn't pay attention to what I was doing. And so I had it sent back to me twice. And then one time they just called me and said, can you just fax us a signature here? And we'll just get this done. So, I mean, it was totally on me. So that's done. Talked to Saskatchewan, gave them a bunch of money, and they said, yeah, we'll change your birth certificate. So that's coming. The gender marker was separate. And I've actually done that on my driver's license already. But I'm not going to be able to do that until I get my I'm not going to be able to do the gender marker on the health card until I get my birth certificate amended, because they want to see that. But Service Ontario has been great. They know me on a first name basis now anyway, because I went in there to get my driver's license done, to do the gender marker change. And they were so nice about it. And then later on, I went back in because I'd had to change my address, because that's another thing. And I gave them my health card and said, "Yeah, could you fix the picture on this?" And they said, "No." Then they looked at me, and they looked at the picture, and they looked at me again and said, "We can take care of this for you, ma'am." They ultimately took 4 pictures, and they was like, "Okay, just turn a little bit this way. We're getting a bit of glare." So trying to make it, really, it was a horrible picture, but they really tried hard. So I've not had any problems with government services. They've been bent over backwards to help make it happen. I was really impressed. But it is a lot of stuff to do, and that's basically where I am at the moment. So I'm just waiting for the birth certificate, and then I have to change my name like everywhere. So, yeah.
So it is a bit of a process, even once you've got the legal change, right? To go through it all and get things changed.
Yeah, passport, yeah.
And Chloe, you're talking about, yes, and Chloe in a week is going off to Spain. So you know all about passports right now, I bet.
Yeah. It wasn't actually too complicated. I don't know if Canadian passports or Quebec passports. I think they're Canadian, right? They're not based on your province. So essentially, changing name on your passport is, you cannot just upgrade it. Like, even if you're still within the right years and everything, it's a new request. In my case, mine have been dead for 8 years or so I had needed a new one anyway. So, but yeah, that's one of the things, is that they can't do that kind of change as just an amendment on your passport. So if you plan to fly, you will have to just do a new request as if you never had a passport. You find somebody that you know, or maybe
Go through the whole process.
Police officer, whatever, that can approve your identity, and you just send them the money and wait. It wasn't complicated at all. My picture in it looked like I'm a criminal, of course, but that's it's just the way these pictures work, right? But yeah, passport is probably the last one in the list you can do, and the fact your plane ticket has to match your passport information, it's kind of like one of those things. You want to make sure that they are both aligned, so that when you fly, you have the new name on your tickets and the passport, or you're using your old passport with old name, which in both cases is going to be kind of like some work.
This may be a little bit off topic, but I think it's related. That I have had a conversation with a couple of people who have noted. So again, being non-binary, it probably would make more sense for me to have X on certain documents, but that it can be very difficult to travel to a lot of places if that's what's on your passport. Which leaves me in the position of having to choose now, do I put the X on there and be honest, or do I choose something that maybe isn't 100% true and go one way or the other? I don't really feel comfortable leaving the M on there, but honestly, the F doesn't really fit completely either. So I'm a little lost on that one. And that brings me back to the name, in the sense that I'm starting to think, well, maybe I just go with a feminine name and gender marker, just because it makes things simpler, and it makes people think twice before they go, and just because then I can just tell people, no, really, I'm non-binary, and it'd be easier than having to go through all the hassle of trying to travel with an X.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, some countries won't even let you enter with an X. So it advantages you to pick between M and F. And if you have to pick between those two, very often you can actually min-max the game if you want. And the solution is often to pick F in that case. car insurance being a good example, that you have to pay less if you're considered a woman. Well, not at our age. We're all old enough that it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
But for younger trans folks, if you're non-binary, you can lean towards F, and you'll actually end up like maxing your experience. And yes, the X on the birth certificate or the X on the driver's license or the X on the passport are all nice moves that like countries like Canada are doing quite well. But you're essentially locking yourself out of some countries that are not up to speed. So I would personally recommend against it. Also, if you consider the patriarchal society, as soon as you're not M, you're essentially less privileged. So between F and X, essentially you're in both cases not considered a guy. Therefore, you lose some privileges right there.
Well, the same thing applies for me for name. Just getting back to that again, like so, choosing a name. If I can't find one that's generic enough or non-binary enough, I still can use Carrie. But trying to find that name that can be shortened to Carrie that I can actually use as a legal name, then I'm looking at possibly the same kind of issue, finding a feminine name that can be shortened to Carrie. And I have, okay, so I'll just put a couple of the contenders out there. One of them actually I thought of was kind of not a name, and that is Karen. I have an Irish background, and Karen is really just a pile of stones. It's not really used as a name. But my wife keeps calling me Karen, and that's these days Karen is not a good name to have. So I'm not sure. But I thought, well, we could, if they say Karen, I could say no, it's Karen, and and do that a couple of times. And just call me Carrie, and just go on.
Well, it's interesting because my godfather, so my dad's brother, who they picked as my godfather, is actually called Jean-Marie. In French, Jean is made as a name, even though like in English it's Jean, so it's usually as a woman's name very often. Jean Grey in X-Men. So the second name, however, is Mary, right? Which is definitely a feminine name. And because in that family of 16, pretty much everybody is Jean something. Like my dad is Jean Beckmaus, my godfather is Jean-Marie, and there's a bunch of other Jean something. So they don't ever use the first part between themselves as brothers. So they would just call each other, hey, Beckmaus, hey, Mary, which is like a woman's name for my godfather, and nobody bats an eye. And I think that's kind of wonderful that it's happening. And I'm kind of wondering just how much you could actually pull that card and use like a feminine name, but just like wear it non-binarily. And I was thinking earlier when you mentioned like Carrie, but like a longer name or something, and I was wondering, like, could you actually go for a very feminine official name, but tell people that you go by Carrie instead, like Caroline, for example, and you could just say like, yeah.
Yep, and Caroline is definitely, well, you say it with such a lovely French accent, but I would say Caroline. Definitely one of the contenders, and Carlene is another contender, I think, too. So, yeah. I had no problem picking a middle name, though. I picked the name Grace.
Because nobody uses their...
Well, that's true, but I love the whole idea of grace, giving people grace, giving them space to be who they are. And it has such meaning to me that one was a no-brainer. That's an easy middle name change.
A lot of people, when they're trying to change a name and using it, they're afraid of offending people. But it's not going to be an offense, really, and especially when it's a middle name. How many times are you going to say your middle name outright? I mean, I've maybe said it twice when it was something to do legally, but other than that, I've never said Patrice. It never comes up. So
it's one of the things that surprises me about BC is that your middle name shows up on all your stuff. In Quebec, it was just first name, last name everywhere. But here on all my ID and pretty much every contract I sign, Anne Sophie does show up, which I like because it reminds me that anytime I could decide that I'm tired of going by Cloe and just tell the government I would like to switch to this one as my main one, which is one of the cool thing about middle names, right? Like it's a way to be able to change your name without fees. There might be a small fee, I'm not sure, but it's much more hassle free than a full name change to just be able to say, because I have two backup names essentially, and Anne is definitely the most multilingual one that I have, I find. Although Sophie, I think, is also pretty like universally known in many languages. So my first name that I picked, the actual one I'm using, is the most complicated one because nobody pronounces it right. But that's something I would keep in mind. Also, like Jan and Anne mean grace, like I said earlier. So you could actually look for names that mean the name rather than are the name. If you're interested in maybe kind of like playing around the rules a little.
It can be a little bit fun navigating all that and going through all the possibilities and
Etymology is so fun.
Things. Yeah. One of the ironic things is when I found the name Carline out of a list of names that I was trying to get that could shorten to Carrie. When you look up the meaning of Carline, it actually means man. So that. So maybe that works for non-binary then. I don't know.
Yeah, the meaning of name is interesting. Like my dead name meant literally like horse. Two Greek words, right? Phil is love of, and hippos, like hippodrome, horses. Like Chloe is actually the name, the epitaph of Demeter, one of her different aspect essentially, where she takes care of young sprouts. And I was a director at Eidos when I picked the name, and I had like 10 people under me, and I like to take care of young employees and teach them. And I was like, the name fits me so well. So it was also an accident, but I dig going into etymology of names and figuring out what it means. What's the origin? What's the country of origin? What's the original spelling? Because Chloe normally is with a K and umlauts on the E with the H as well. But I kill the H personally. But yeah, it can be super fun to actually like dig into that and have some fun with it.
Exactly.
So it's been a while for both of you guys, Chloe and Carlie, using your new name, your name. How have you felt now that you've been using it for so long, like compared to your old name? Like, is it just you, or do you still sometimes remember the old name fondly or not?
Well, for me, as soon as my name was changed, I was changed. I haven't looked backwards, but then the name I came out of was very, very masculine. So when I was adopted, they changed my name to a Karl Frederick, and it's very German, very ethnic, very masculine. And when I changed away from that into my new name, I am who I am, and I have not thought about the ethnic name since. So yeah, and it never comes up in conversation because most anyone that I have met since I've transitioned are all new friends. They're not people. I mean, most of the people that I grew up with are no longer with us on this earth. So it's not like I interact with a lot of people that had known my name for 50 years. So I haven't had any issues of, writing out my old name by accident, because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I started working at Relic a year ago when I moved here, a year and a month ago at this point. I moved here December 4th. 2020. So all of 2021 and now the beginning of 2022. So the majority of, since I changed legally my name and transition has happened now in this province where, well, literally I arrived here and I was Cloe. Nobody has known me as anything else. I did do my interviews and I had written Cloe on my resume and everything, but I had to give them my legal name for, at the moment of signing the contract, I was still in the middle of changing my name, so they knew it. But when I did sign, it was already legally changed. So everything is under just the new name. The old one was maybe written somewhere in parentheses, but that's it. So some people at HR know it, and that's about it. When I talk to myself, I used to use though when talking to myself, though you're so dumb or whatever, like, sometimes you talk to yourself in inner monologue, and now it's Chloe or Cloe. So that totally changed. I don't really have much contact with my friends from Quebec. Most of them don't talk to me all that much anymore. I do have a couple who do, and they are fine with the new name. So I want to say that it works super well for me. It's been over a year. It feels like forever at this point. And I remember the first time I had to sign with my new name. I had no idea how I would actually write the letters, because it's like, oh wait, I knew how to spell my old name in a signature form, but how do I do this? So I actually practiced it a bit. On paper or on my Cintiq.
I'm still practicing.
Yeah, I think I pretty much nailed the way I do it now. They must all look the same, but also whenever I draw a picture, I used to just sign Doe, and now I sign Cloe with a cat face next to it. So that's my artistic signature or whatever. And it's just everywhere, and it feels very natural, both to me and like I said, everybody at work just knows me as Chloe. I'm not stealth, because I tell people I'm trans and I always wear my necklace. But they don't know who I was before. I do tell people who share my previous name the funny story that I keep telling people whenever I see someone share my dead name, because it's not a super common name, but it's common enough. It's in the Bible and everything. And there would always be one or two in every video game studio where I was. And I always had this image in my head that all of us sharing the same name would fight to the death with sabers like in Islander to decide who gets to claim the name as their own, and everybody else has to pick a nickname or something. And obviously I failed. I must have lost a duel at some point. So the rest of them can fight over it now. I'm out of that race.
Just to wrap things up, I want to give a chance if there's any tips that you'd like to share about changing your name, maybe with people who are watching. Hopefully they've stayed this long, because this is the best part, of course, when you share the tips. Anything that you'd like to give them as advice?
Well, for me, I think, you don't try to go to something that you're going to have to think all the time about how you're going to say your name or spell it. I know dramatic is great and everything else, and it depends on what your career statuses are and such. If there's a lot of places that you don't want to walk into and say, that you have this name that just spells out, stripper. That was one of the biggest things for me. It was, don't come up with a name that sounds like you just walked out of the local strip joint and you haven't figured out what your non-stage name is yet. And so for me, I would say just stick with something that you can think about, that you've studied a little bit about, whether you want it to be Fantasia kind of thing or not, or if you want to have something from the Bible, that's fantastic, as long as there's a meaning to you about what you're going to call yourself. That's what the biggest thing is.
Yeah, I have a couple of pieces of advice. There's a bunch of websites or actually tools you can use on browsers to change your name whenever it shows up on screen to another one. So you can essentially try a new first name online. There's web pages where you can type your first name and pronouns and everything, and the thing will either read a book but would put your name instead of Dorothy in Wizard of Oz or whatever, so that you can read a bunch of sentences and see how it feels to read that with your name. So that's a good way to try it by yourself, especially if you're autistic or neurodivergent like me. You might actually prefer that kind of approach. But for the people who may be more social inclined, you can find a group of trusted friends and have them try different names. Also, pull them into the name decision. Like I brought my mom into mine, because I find that by bringing either friends or family in the process, involving them, you give them something that like a lot of trans people will just arrive and be authoritative about some of the change. And even though at the end of the day, it's your call, really, like the name you're gonna pick, just asking them like, what would have been my name if I was born a girl? Or what would you do to change that middle name? Things like that. I think it's a nice touch to try to at least like keep the relationship intact. So yeah, like playtesting the name with friends. Online games are absolutely amazing for playtesting your name, because your name is everywhere. Everybody's using it, and in specific games, they will actually write it in the chat. They won't say you, they will put Cloe, or sometimes they'll put your last name instead because they have a form of respect towards you. But like, I think it's a really good place to try different names. Also, most other players will call you by your character name. So you'll see your name a lot, and you'll hear it and figure it out if you like it or not. There's a ton of different ways of testing it. I think specifically more for people like me who are into computers. But like I said, parents, friends, they are also invaluable resources.
Carlie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, when it comes to travel documents and you're changing your name, be very meticulous in making sure that you use it exactly the same way on everything. So for instance, you could use your middle initial instead of your middle name. This is advice I've gotten from my brother, who just went through getting his passport. A lot of the airline tickets and passports and all the other travel documents, if your name doesn't match exactly the same way on everything, red flags go up and they start giving you hassles. So that's not so much name change. Well, it's not so much the picking the name, but it's making sure that you use the name that you've chosen consistently. Yeah,
Which means you have to think consistently about how you actually want it to look. Yeah, whether you want to use the initial, whether you want to use the name.
Yeah. Either way, it's fine. You just have to do it the same way every single time on everything.
And I think we picked up a little tip there too that's related to that. Make sure you practice your signature.
Yes. Yeah.
Although, I'm wondering these days if they actually look at signatures at all. Because I've started using sign and carry, and I don't think anybody even notices whether it's one thing or another. But
I mean, actors sign their pseudonym all over the time, and it's legal. So they can't do anything about it. You could technically put an X. It's still good.
If your hand met the paper, that's what counts, right? Yeah.
Like Bruce Willis's real name is not Bruce Willis after all. Like actors change name all the time.
I want to thank both of you, Cloe and Carlie, for joining us tonight, and a good discussion about names. And I hope the viewers, you guys that are watching tonight, have learned a little bit about what you what it's like to change your name, how you change your name, all of that bits of information. I hope that's been helpful. The conversation doesn't have to stop here. Feel free, if you have questions or things, go ahead and put them in the comments. Carlie and I will make sure they get to one of these guys if you have a specific question for them, or we'll try and answer them as best we can. Otherwise, we'd love to hear your comments and your questions as well. And if you have other suggestions or things that you'd like to see on the Transform in the future, please don't hesitate to add that into the comments as well, and we'll see what we can do. So thank you very much for joining us and for watching all the way to the end. And be sure to go and check out Carlie and Chloe's videos and their stories and get their whole story down there. And bye for now.
Bye.